wish I was as cool as Dragon Ball Z. Okay, I was also putting colors, whenever I put a color in the fruit, I also put a little bit in the shadow to kind of start building up that darkness. And then that way, if the fruit and the shadow are made with the same color, then they, again, feel related, right? So I'm gonna put in a little more of this blue color. I'm not gonna worry about like filling the whole thing, but I do wanna give myself enough to have room for the shadows. And the shadows, just like everything else, you can proportion the size and shape of them. So you can figure out like, okay, how much compared to the height or width of the apple, how much does the shadow stick out, etc. Okay, so I'm going to start darkening part of the lime. Now when I look at the edge of the fruit, I'm looking at how does this compare with this behind it. And you can squint if you're not sure if something is lighter or darker, because when you squint, you kind of unfocus your eyes and it forces you to see the values more clearly and with more contrast. So my lime is definitely darker here than the paper behind it. And this blue isn't particularly dark, but because of how we're using the color theory and how we're blending it with the other colors, it becomes dark. Yeah, it still has the effect that we want. I need to raise this a little bit. Now we know that our light is coming from the top, but we can darken this because that's how it contrasts with what's behind it. So just like, remember, think back to when you guys did your grid portrait and you had to choose what to put in the background and you put in a value behind the portrait that made sense so that your portrait would stand out, right? So that it would have contrast. So look at your contrasts. Always be comparing. How does this compare to what's around it? How does it compare to what's next to it? And then you make the same comparison in your fruit or in your drawing.
It's really starting to look like the real deal.
Look limey. And that's kind of a cool concept. I don't know if I've said it with this project, but this is something I catch myself saying a lot. If we feel intimidated drawing something, think of it this way. You're not actually drawing the thing. You're drawing the effect of the thing. And our brains kind of put things together visually. So you don't need the whole effect of the thing. You just need enough for your brain to make sense of it. And that's exactly what's happening, and that's exactly why I offered you the choice to keep going at this part of the process, because I know we've talked about, like, you guys see a lot of the beginnings of projects, but you don't often see the middles or the ends, and especially I want you to be able to see the point at which it starts to like look like the thing, right? Because clearly this is still not done, but there's enough visual information in there that your brain can kind of make sense of it and interpret it correctly. And I think that's really cool about art. You don't have to have it be like photorealistic, right? You just have to have enough of the values in the right place for it to make enough sense. I'm looking at this gradient. How does this highlight transition into the colors around it? It's pretty gradual. Now I'm looking at how does this part down here compare to this part up here. This part is still darker, so I'm going to layer more. Resist the urge to just push harder.
Why?
If you push harder, you're going to jump ahead in the wax buildup process, and you could potentially limit yourself later on. Also, particularly with these better quality pencils, it's really easy to put too much pigment and then not be able to adjust later.
Is there paper that has like deeper teeth?
Yes.
Is that like better paper usually?
Better is subjective. It depends on what you're doing. So watercolor paper, for example, has much bigger fibers. It's toothier. Hot press is different than cold press. I think cold press is the one that's more textured. Hot press is a little smoother. So there's a giant paper market as far as like a variety of paper choices.
Yeah.
And it depends on what you're doing. Some people really like to see the paper texture. Some people really don't. It depends on, you know, like if you're painting, you might want it to be a little toothier so that it takes the paint off the brush a little bit more aggressively. Some people like things to be very, very smooth. What I find is that students tend to like the toothier paper because it hides your brush strokes a little more. When you draw on something that's really smooth, it tends to make your lines look linier. So I guess it just depends. It's a personal preference thing.
Personal preference, yeah.
So I'm trying to be careful to not lose that highlight there, but I do need to look at how this highlight compares to what for me is the counter behind it. And that even where the highlight is still darker than the counter. So that's part of my mindset as I'm going through this, is I'm making the comparison, but I'm also kind of being protective over those particular areas, and particularly the highlight areas. You can always, almost always make something darker. It's much more difficult to make things lighter. So when I'm coming in here, I'm looking at what is the color temperature of this particular highlight. Is it more yellow? Is it more green? Is it warmer? Is it cooler? It looks like it needs to be a little smaller, so I'm going to condense this a little bit. And I definitely need more of a separation between this highlight and this highlight. So I have, when I look at that lime, and I don't know if you guys can see my eyes, like how much I'm looking at the drawing versus how much I'm actually looking at the arrangement. I think I'd be interested to do like a little study, like and actually measure it. I feel like it's about half and half. And I feel like the more you look at the arrangement, the better chance for accuracy you're going to have, because it helps you resist that urge to assume. This is the highlight here where it's actually shine from the surface of the lime. And so I'm trying to kind of keep the integrity of that little like speckly whiteness, which is a different shape and it has a different quality than like this highlight or this highlight. And then between these two, is one lighter or darker? I feel like this one's almost a little lighter than this one, because this one, the light is coming this way. So this one doesn't have as much highlight from the actual light source. I think it's just that the lime itself is a little lighter there. And so when we make the arrangements, when we look at that tomorrow, we're going to try to pair things up, no pun intended, so that there are different surface qualities. So like this apple is a little duller, this lime is a little bit shinier. And then there's also like different color relationships. Now that I've worked on the lime for a while, I'm going to switch over to this, and I'm going to take the same color that I was just using, and I'm going to reinforce where that color needs to be in this fruit. So I'm making it feel connected because I'm using the same color. Also, this is a little orangey here compared to what I'm seeing. I'm seeing it more almost brownish up there. So how do we neutralize an orange color? Blue, yep. And green is pretty close to that. So I can put in a little green, knowing that I'm going to follow it up with some blue also. And it's way greener down here, where it gets more reflection from the the lime. It is also getting some blue reflection from down here. Compared to the counter behind it, this is darker. What I really could do is put in a little like warm color back here, just so that visually I'm comparing a little more accurately, particularly if you have something like this, where you have like a cool colored fruit in front of a warm colored background. That does affect how you see things. And then I have a line like about here where the like the backsplash meets the counter. So I would want to make sure that I include some sort of difference there. So I'm looking at that and I'm asking myself, how does this compare to this visually? I see kind of a light line-ish here. It's kind of soft. It's not like a hard line, but it has soft edges. And then above it, it's pretty similar in color and value. So I'm just going to approximate that. Again, think of it as drawing the effect of it without having to draw every little detail. I can't tell if this is lined up with this. It's not too far off. That's something that if I was paying more attention to proportions today, that I would definitely spend a lot more time on. So over here, remember I said here the lime is darker than what's behind it, so this has to look lighter compared to this. Here, it's the opposite. So here, this part of the apple is way lighter than what is behind it. So I'm gonna wanna put some color in there, but then also dull this down and darken it so that this contrast matches what I see. Even if your colors are not exactly the same, the value and the contrast is what actually makes your brain like recognize it and understand what it is. So if you can get the values right, you can have a little more leeway with the color. So let that be somewhat comforting, hopefully. I'm also kind of rushing through this. You guys are going to have more time than obviously. This is my second class period working on this particular drawing. You guys are going to have more than 2 class periods to accomplish this. So you don't have to worry about going at the speed that I'm going, which will mean that your strokes will be a little better quality. I don't want to get too dark here because this has to be darker back there. So actually what I'm going to do is take this, put in a little orange here. And then if I want to make this orange darker back here, what am I going to do next? Blue, yep. Which is good because then it's going to pick up the same quality as here. So look at this. This is not even a dark blue. It's like a medium-ish blue. But when I put it over this orange, look at what's happening.
It's becoming purple.
It's neutralizing, right? So it's getting darker and duller. But it doesn't read as blue as soon as it mixes together. And if it was reading as blue, and if that was too much for you and not what you wanted, what could you do? More orange on top of it. Yeah, kind of sandwich your colors. So now when I look at this, see how I sat back, so I'm looking from a distance. I need to bring this down a little bit too. And I see a little bit of a gradient here where it's darker back here. And it kind of gets a little lighter as it comes into here. But the value between here and here is actually very similar, even though this is cool and this is warm. Is this helping?
Yeah.
Questions? Concerns? Do this one. let's come back into this one. So now that I just used this, I'm going to carry that color again. So if you're not sure, like have the color that you just used and then look at your other objects and see where, even if you just put like a little tiny, you know, like if it was watercolor, you would call it a wash of it, just a little bit. We do this a lot in theatrical, like set painting as well. We carry colors throughout the whole composition. In that case, it would be throughout the whole stage. So that things feel like they relate to each other. I can also use this to kind of dull down that green a little bit. Orange and green are not technically opposites on the color wheel, but they do have a similar effect. All right, I need to do more with this dimple up here. So I have the shadow here from the stem, and I need to make sure that shadow ends right here where the like front part of the apple overlaps with it. And then something that I have not done such a hot job of right now is like really defining where that edge needs to end. So when you make the dimple, usually it has like a sharper edge in the front where it kind of overlaps, and then it'll have that shadow kind of behind it. Questions?
You're pretty good at art, Miss Harpole.
Thanks.
Make a career out of it.
Did I ever tell you about one of my favorite comments from a student ever?
Let's hear it.
So I taught for 11 years, and then I left teaching to do other professional work. But 4 years after I left teaching, the art teacher that replaced me at that original position had a baby. And so they needed an art sub, and I went in to sub for 3 months for her maternity leave. And so I was subbing at the school where I used to teach. But obviously, like the students, none of the students were the same because it had been 4 years. And so I was teaching a ceramics class one day while I was subbing. And I was doing a pottery wheel demo, much like what I did yesterday for you guys. And this very sweet girl, she goes, "Ms. Harpold, have you ever taken a ceramics class? Because you're pretty good at this." And I was like, "Yes, I have taken a ceramics class. Thank you for saying that. That's a really nice compliment."
Do you usually like teach ceramics then?
Yeah, I taught ceramics for 11 years.
Oh.
But she didn't know. It was just darling. She really meant well. I'm not satisfied with that dimple yet, but it's coming. Do you notice how I'm not finishing one area before I move on? Like I'm moving a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. That's not just like a short attention span thing. That is a work the drawing in parts thing, because it helps it develop all together. You don't want to have like one super finished fruit and then have another part that's like still white and naked paper. So let's go back to these shadows, because I haven't done that in a while. I'm paying attention to, oftentimes right under the fruit, but you can't assume, you have to look for it, is where the shadow is the darkest. And then depending on how your light source is relative to your fruit, you might have a hard edge to your shadow, you might have a softer edge, you might have some hard edges and some softer edges. You're really going to have to pay attention to that. And I did not proportion in my shadows when I started this, so that was an oversight on my part because I was doing a demo. So I have kind of two shadows that are kind of overlapping here. And then this shadow touches the line, but there's a little highlight in the middle, so I want to preserve that. So when you're doing this, it's as much what you're like leaving and what you're protecting and where you're saving negative space as it is what you're coloring in. It's a softer edge here. There's a little bit more darkness up here. This needs to be a bit sharper. This shadow doesn't go up very far. Well, we got farther.